This is Democracy Watch. Marc, we just got some major good news out of a crucial battleground state. Can you tell us what just happened in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, this is a major victory for voters and voting rights in what could be the deciding state in 2024. A Pennsylvania court ruled that the counties must count mail-in ballots that are timely received, so they come in on time, okay, but are missing or have incorrect dates on the outer envelope, okay? So these are ballots that are misdated or undated. The person fills out their absentee ballot, they write the date of the election on the date, or they leave it blank, or they put their birth date, but they arrive on time to the counties. There's no question that they are timely cast ballots, but don't have the dates. Those have to be counted, and that is a ruling by the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania under the terms and provisions of the state constitution, the Pennsylvania state constitution.
And will this be appealed? Is there a higher court? Will this be appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court?
It has already been appealed by the Republicans to the High Court of Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court. And, I just want to pause there for a second to say, you might imagine a different world in which both parties celebrated a ruling that said that voters would have their ballots counted rather than thrown in the garbage because they put the wrong date on the next to
which
their
is
signature.
Completely immaterial.
Totally immaterial, has nothing to do with anything. But, you might imagine that world. And I would tell you that world wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that it was Republicans who were relying particularly for their older voters, on mail-in voting. It was not that long ago that, frankly, many young voters and minority voters preferred to vote in person, particularly in person early. Why we always used to talk about souls to the polls so much, right? That was early in-person voting, and it was Republicans who would have cheered this, but not anymore. In the world of Donald Trump, the Republican Party hates this ruling, and so they have already appealed this and are seeking review in the High Court of Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court.
How many votes is this going to impact this year?
This is a big deal because you're talking about at least 10,000, more likely tens of thousands of ballots that will be affected.
In a state, by the way, that was decided unto itself by tens of thousands of votes.
That's exactly right. I mean, this very much could be the margin of victory or defeat for not just Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, but also in the competitive Senate race between Bob Casey and McCormick, or some of the swing House races. There are at least 3 very competitive House races that we focus on there when we talk about control of the House. So this is a huge ruling for voters in Pennsylvania. It is a huge ruling for voting rights, but it is also a huge ruling when it comes to the outcome of the 2024 elections, because, I said that you could imagine a different world. Well, we can stop imagining. These ballots are going to be disproportionately young. They're going to be disproportionately minority voters, and they're going to be overwhelmingly Democrats of all stripes.
And that was my next question, is what groups of people are most likely to have their ballots rejected for being outdated or misdated? But the reality is that Republicans know full well, and this is why they're so hostile to these kind of votes, they know full well that the people actually taking advantage of early voting, of mail voting, are not their own voters, because they've been groomed, their own voters, to only go and vote on Election Day, because Donald Trump keeps perpetuating this idea that any early voting, any mail voting is just rife with fraud.
Right. And so we know a couple of things. The first is, as you say, as an overall pool, we know mail-in voting in Pennsylvania and virtually everywhere in the country right now is used more often by Democrats. I shouldn't say advantage, because it doesn't advantage one party or the other, but it's more often used by Democrats because of the lies that Donald Trump has been spreading about it. But we also know something else, which is that within the pool of rejected mail-in ballots, okay, now we're just taking the subset of rejected mail-in ballots, we know that those are disproportionately young versus old, and Black and Hispanic versus white. So we know that the pool of rejected ballots are going to skew more in the direction of minority voters and young voters. And for people who are curious why that is, it actually hits young voters even more harder than it does minority voters, because young voters tend to have less reliable mail service, and young voters have less history in filling out these ballot envelopes. So they are more likely to put the wrong date. They also are young voters are less likely to see something like dating their signature as super important. They have not grown up in a world in which signatures are the thing that they use to validate their most important documents, and so signatures and dates next to signature tend to play a less important role.
Now, I know Republicans are going to point to this and try to claim that certain people leaving this information off of the ballots is somehow disqualifying. For posterity here, does putting the date actually matter? Do election officials even use the date on the outside envelope to determine if a ballot was sent in on time?
They absolutely do not. Period. Full stop. But I'm glad you asked the question, because I am getting a lot of hate. Shocker. Yeah. I'm getting a lot of hate by email or on social media by Republicans and election deniers who are saying, oh, Marc Elias doesn't care what the date is of these ballots. These ballots could come in a week or 3 weeks after Election Day. They can be voted after Election Day, and it doesn't matter. And that is either because they are intentionally misrepresenting the truth, or they have been lied to so often by Donald Trump that they don't understand it. These ballots have been timely received. Okay, the ballots we're talking about in Pennsylvania, they have come in before or on Election Day. These are not ballots that possibly could have been voted after Election Day. They have been received already. So the issue with the date is not the date upon which they were voted. The only dating issue here is the date on the outer envelope filled in by the voter. So the date is doing literally no work, because the election officials in the counties, they are date stamping when the counties receive the ballots with an official date stamp. So there's no question that these ballots were voted on time.
So these fields are only there specifically so that if you mess up, it gives Republicans a predicate to then try to throw them away. They are there as a trap, basically, like a booby trap to confuse people or to have them do something wrong so that can be used as justification to then undermine these ballots.
Yes. Look, a lot of these traps go back to a different era, decades ago, when people were, in fact, signing things and dating next to it. I'm sure everyone's filled out a form where you have to put your signature and date something. And you may ask yourself, why the hell do we still have to do that, since most of these documents are now like put in, either DocuSign or Adobe Acrobat or something that locks an electronic date that is unchangeable. And it's just because we have not caught up in a lot of our antiquated forms with the new realities. And that's the situation here. The counties know when they receive these things. There may be a postmark from the Postal Service, but even if there's a postmark from the Postal Service, they are still hard date stamping them when they are received by the counties. So the dating here is just an anachronism from another era. It is doing no work, and all it is doing is disenfranchising voters. But the question, Brian, is why are Republicans looking for excuses to throw out votes? Because that's the reality of where we are. In state after state, whether it's Pennsylvania or someplace else, we talk about this every week. Republicans have another scheme to throw out otherwise lawful votes.
I do want to talk about your firm's work in the federal case that's similar to this one. But before we do, just a note for everybody watching, if you want to support the invaluable work that Marc and his team are doing in the courts, which is ground zero in the fight to protect democracy right now, a small step that we can all take is signing up for Democracy Docket. It's the news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting in elections. It's a resource I use on a daily basis. It's super helpful. So I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. So Marc, can you talk about the lawsuit that your firm is working on in the federal courts that's similar to this one in PA?
Yeah, so there have been several lawsuits, as people probably know, on this issue or related issues that have percolated up and down the various courts around Pennsylvania. One of those cases is a case, as you mentioned, my law firm is involved in for parts of the Democratic Party in federal court that say that these requirements violate the U.S. federal Constitution. This is in state court saying it violates the state Constitution. I believe it violates both the state and federal Constitution because, however you look at it, you're potentially disenfranchising, or not potentially, you are in fact disenfranchising people. They are U.S. citizens. They are properly registered. They are eligible to vote. They haven't cast another ballot. There is nothing wrong with the ballot inside the envelope. It is perfectly cast. And yet they are seeing their ballots thrown in the trash. They are suffering the indignity of being disenfranchised because of the antiquated dating form on the outer envelope. And so whether it's this case in state court or the federal court case, this courts need to protect these voters.
Right. And I know that we don't think of it this way, but this is just a modern version of a poll tax or having to choose how many jelly beans are in a jar. I mean, this is not much different because there's no prohibition. So there's no prohibition in the Constitution to voting if you just don't if you haven't properly dated the outside envelope. I mean, this is just some new obstacle that they've created to prevent people from voting.
There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that says you have to know the date in order to vote. Right. And no less, not only know the date, but interpret the form where there's a place for a date. Interpret it, though. What they mean is the date you signed, as opposed to the date of the election, as opposed to your birth date, which are, by the way, other dates that Republicans in other states, the birth date, some places they do want you to have your birth date. So there is nothing in the right to vote that is conditioned on being able to interpret this form and knowing the date. You should be allowed to vote even if you don't know what day the date is.
And let's finish off with this. I know that we had spoken at the top about the prospect of Republicans appealing this to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Is there any worry about Republicans' ability to jump from the state court system into the federal court system and get this thing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court where because of the Clarence Thomases of the world, because of the Samuel Alitos of the world, they may be more hostile to something like this?
There should not be that concern, but unfortunately there is that concern. The reason why I say there shouldn't be that concern is because it has been a matter of black letter law. It has been axiomatic for, since the founding of the Constitution that state courts are the final say on state constitutions, that the U.S. Supreme Court can review how a state court applies federal law, how it interprets the federal Constitution, how a federal court interprets the federal Constitution or federal law, but that when it comes to interpreting the state Constitution, that is the exclusive province of the state Supreme Courts. Well, we know that this fringe theory, this independent state legislature theory, started getting circulated, a few years ago, and Republicans and conservative lawyers have been trying to ride this horse. They brought it to the U.S. Supreme Court in a North Carolina redistricting case that my law firm was involved in defending against. They lost. We won. North Carolina got to undo gerrymandering for a period of time. But we know that they are looking for additional ways to bring these claims forward. And basically what they're saying is that when it comes to federal elections, the state Supreme Court cannot strike down state laws using its state constitutions. Like I said, this theory has failed before, but we know that there is an effort by the state of Montana to get a case that my firm won, striking down voter suppression laws there before the U.S. Supreme Court. That's pending. There is another case out of Pennsylvania that they are trying to get before the U.S. Supreme Court. There's a case out of Michigan that conservatives are trying to get before the U.S. Supreme Court. And this would be yet another opportunity for them on an emergency basis to go to the Supreme Court and say that the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania doesn't get to apply its state constitution. This is a fringe right-wing theory. It would undermine voting rights in such an extreme way that not even the Supreme Court a few months ago in the North Carolina case was willing to do it. But as you point out, this court has shown a willingness at critical junctures to do the unthinkable. I never would have thought that they'd say that the President of the United States could engage in assassination of their political opponents as long as it's done in their official capacity. So they have shown a willingness to do extreme things when it benefits Donald Trump. So, we will have more to say. They're not going to be able to do it without a fight by a lot of lawyers, but it's something we have to keep watching, and it's one of the things Democracy Docket follows every single day.
Well, all of that underscores the importance of the work that you and your team are doing. I should note that you are currently litigating 59 voting rights cases in 20 states. So basically, in half of the country, your team is litigating voting rights cases. What I want to say to people watching right now, as a very small step that we can do to show some appreciation for the work that Marc and his team are doing is to everybody click the link right here on the screen or in the post description of this video, sign up for Democracy Docket. That is a way to make sure that we can all take some small steps to show our appreciation for the work that they do. I'll put that link right here on the screen and again in the post description. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.